Colonel David Stone had been a Marine for 28 years, and every single day of those years had left its mark on him. The man who now sat alone in his small apartment looked nothing like the powerful commander who once led hundreds of men through the deadliest war zones on Earth. His hands shook when he tried to hold a coffee cup. His body ached from old injuries that never quite healed right. The worst part, though, was the nights when sleep refused to come, or when it did come, it brought memories he wished he could forget. The apartment near Camp Pendleton was small, but it suited him fine. The walls were covered with framed photographs and medals from a lifetime of service. There were pictures of young Marines smiling before they knew what war really meant. There were commendations with fancy words that tried to describe moments of chaos and blood. There were faces of men who never made it home, and their ghosts visited him every single night. 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan had taken their toll. Colonel Stone carried scars both visible and invisible. The visible ones came from an IED blast that should have killed him, but instead only took 3 of his Marines that day. The invisible ones were harder to explain to people who had never been there. How do you tell someone what it feels like to close your eyes and still see the faces of men you could not save? How do you explain that loud noises make your heart race and your body prepare for combat even though the war ended years ago? His daughter, Catherine, had been trying to get him help for months now. She would call every few days with a new suggestion. Have you tried calling the VA hospital? What about that support group for veterans? Maybe you should let someone come check on your dad. Each time, he gave her the same answer. He was fine. He had handled worse situations than this. He did not need anyone telling him what to do. The truth was far from fine, though. Colonel Stone barely ate anymore because food had lost its taste. He slept maybe 3 hours a night if he was lucky. The medications his doctors prescribed sat in orange bottles on the kitchen counter gathering dust. Taking them felt like admitting defeat, and that was something a Marine commander simply did not do. He had spent his entire adult life being the one who gave orders and took care of others. The idea of becoming someone who needed care made him feel weak in a way that enemy bullets never had. Catherine had reached her breaking point last week when she stopped by unannounced. She found him sitting in the dark, even though it was mid-afternoon. The apartment was clean because old habits die hard, but it was clear he was not taking care of himself. His face looked hollow. His eyes had that distant stare she had seen in other veterans. She tried talking to him about getting help, but he shut down the conversation before it could really start. He told her he appreciated her concern, but he was perfectly capable of managing his own affairs. He had commanded Marines in Fallujah and Helmand Province. He had made life and death decisions with incoming fire all around him. He certainly did not need a babysitter now. Catherine left that day with tears in her eyes, knowing her stubborn father was slowly fading away and refusing to let anyone help him. The pride that had once made Colonel Stone a legendary commander was now killing him slowly. His Marines used to say he was tougher than a $2 steak and twice as hard to chew. They said he would walk through hell itself to bring his men home. That reputation was not exaggerated either. There were documented instances of him carrying wounded Marines to safety under heavy enemy fire. There were stories of him going without sleep for days to make sure his men had what they needed. He had earned the respect of every person who served under him, but that same iron will that kept him alive in combat zones was now working against him. He had built walls around himself so high and so thick that even his own daughter could not get through. The warrior mentality that served him so well in war had no place in the quiet struggles of civilian life. There was no enemy to fight, no objective to capture, no mission to complete. Just day after endless day of trying to figure out who David Stone was supposed to be now that he was no longer Colonel Stone. The nightmares were getting worse. Last night he woke up shouting orders to men who were not there. He could still smell the smoke and dust from Fallujah. He could still hear the screams. Some nights he woke up certain he was back in that bombed-out building where they had held position for 16 hours straight. Other nights, it was the faces of the 3 Marines from the Eyed Blast. Young kids, really. Barely old enough to buy a beer back home. They had trusted him to bring them home safe, and he had failed them. During the day, he kept himself busy with small tasks. Cleaning the already clean apartment. Organizing and reorganizing his old military gear. Reading the same books over and over. Anything to keep his mind occupied and away from the dark places it wanted to go. But there were only so many hours in a day, and eventually the walls closed in and he was left alone with his thoughts. Catherine had left pamphlets about veteran services on his kitchen table. Home health care for veterans. Counseling services. Support groups. Peer mentorship programs. He had thrown them all in the trash without reading them. What could some civilian counselor possibly tell him about what he had been through? What could some home health nurse do that he could not do for himself? The very idea felt insulting. What Colonel Stone did not know was that Catherine had not given up. She had made one more phone call to a veterans' home health agency. This time, though, she had been very specific about what she told them. Her father would not accept help from just anyone. He needed someone who understood, someone who had been there, someone who spoke his language. The coordinator on the other end of the phone had listened carefully and then said something that gave Catherine hope for the first time in months. I think I know exactly who to send. Lisa Chun had spent 6 years as a Navy corpsman, and every single one of those days had shaped who she became. The Marines called their corpsman Doc, and that title meant more to her than any degree or certification ever could. She had earned it in the streets of Fallujah back in 2004, when she was just 22 years old and scared out of her mind but determined not to let her Marines down. She had been assigned to 1st Battalion 7th Marines during one of the most intense urban battles of the Iraq War. Those weeks in Fallujah had aged her in ways that no amount of time could have done otherwise. She learned what it meant to work under fire. She learned how to keep her hands steady when everything around her was chaos. She learned the terrible weight of deciding who to treat first when multiple Marines were bleeding out and screaming for help. The Bronze Star she received for valor was tucked away in a box somewhere in her closet. She did not like looking at it because it reminded her of the day she earned it. 2 Marines had been hit by sniper fire in an exposed position. Everyone else had taken cover, but those 2 men were dying and they needed help right then. Lisa had run through that kill zone, ignoring the bullets snapping past her ears, and dragged both men to safety one at a time. She saved their lives, but she never felt like a hero. She felt like someone who had simply done what needed to be done. After her discharge, Lisa went to nursing school and specialized in working with veterans. She understood things about them that other nurses simply could not grasp. She knew why sudden loud noises made them flinch. She knew why some of them got quiet when asked about their service. She knew the look in their eyes when the past came rushing back uninvited. She carried her own version of that past and her own invisible scars from the things she had seen and done. The coordinator at the Veterans Home Health Agency called her on a Tuesday morning. There was a case she thought Lisa would be perfect for. A retired Marine colonel living near Camp Pendleton who was refusing all help. His daughter was desperate. The man was a legend in the community, but he was deteriorating fast and would not let anyone through his defenses. The coordinator mentioned that he had commanded 1st Battalion 7th Marines. Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. She asked for the name, and when she heard it, her hands went still. Colonel David Stone. She knew that name. Every Marine in their battalion knew that name. He had been their commander during Fallujah. The man was a living legend who would walk through enemy fire like he was bulletproof. She had heard countless stories about him, even though she had never actually met him face to face. He operated at the command level, while she was down in the dirt with the rifle companies, but she knew what he had done. She knew about the time he had carried a wounded Marine named Davidson on his back for over half a mile through hostile territory. She knew about the 16-hour defense of a strategic position where he had refused to abandon his wounded. She knew he had been recommended for the Navy Cross, but had instead insisted the award go to one of his junior officers. That was the kind of man Colonel Stone was now that same man was alone and hurting and too proud to ask for help. Lisa understood that pride. She had seen it in countless veterans who came through her care. They had been warriors and leaders, and now they were supposed to sit quietly and let others take care of them. It went against everything they had been trained to be. But Lisa also knew that pride could kill just as surely as any bullet. She read through Colonel Stone's medical file that evening. The physical injuries were substantial. Traumatic brain injury from the IED blast. Chronic pain from multiple injuries. Hearing loss. But it was the notes about his mental state that worried her most. Depression. Severe anxiety. Possible PTSD, though he had refused formal evaluation. Not taking prescribed medications. Declining food intake. Daughter reports social isolation and concerning statements. Lisa had seen this pattern before. Strong men who had faced down death itself, slowly crumbling under the weight of invisible wounds they refused to acknowledge. The tragic thing was that help was available. Treatment worked. But first they had to accept that needing help was not the same as being weak. That was always the hardest part. She prepared carefully for her visit the next morning. She wore her standard nursing scrubs and packed her medical bag with everything she might need. Blood pressure cuff, thermometer, medication organizer, wound care supplies. She also made sure to wear short sleeves. That was not her usual choice, but today it was intentional. Today she needed a specific tool, and it was tattooed on her right forearm. The tattoo was something she had gotten 6 months after coming home from Iraq. It showed the eagle globe and anchor of the Marine Corps intertwined with the caduceus symbol of medical corps. Above it were the words 1/7th Marines Fallujah, 2004. Below, it was the motto Doc Saves. It was not subtle, and it was not meant to be. It was a permanent reminder of who she had been and what she had done, and the brothers she had served alongside. Driving to Colonel Stone's apartment that morning, Lisa felt nervous in a way she had not felt in years. This was not just another patient. This was a man whose leadership had helped keep her Marines alive. This was someone whose decisions had rippled down through the entire battalion. She wanted to help him, but she also knew he would not make it easy. Stubborn Marines never did. The apartment complex was quiet when she arrived. Ground floor unit. Neat and well-maintained. She could see the hand of a military man in the precise way everything was arranged. She took a deep breath and walked up to the door. Her knock was firm and professional. She waited. The man who opened the door was tall and broad-shouldered, but gaunt in a way that spoke of recent weight loss. His hair was gray and cut high and tight in the Marine style. His eyes were sharp and assessing. He looked her up and down in about 2 seconds, and she could tell he had already decided she was not getting inside. His voice was exactly what she expected. Deep and commanding, even in casual conversation. He told her he had not asked for a nurse. He told her to inform his daughter that he was fine and did not require assistance. His tone was polite but absolutely firm. This was not a request. This was an order from a man accustomed to giving them. Lisa maintained her professional composure. She introduced herself and explained that his daughter was concerned about his medication management and overall health. She mentioned his doctor's orders. She tried to appeal to his reason. She had dealt with resistant patients before, and usually she could find a way through. But Colonel Stone was not budging. For every point she made, he had a counter. He did not need help managing his medications. He had been taking care of himself longer than she had been alive. He appreciated her time, but she could leave now. His arms crossed over his chest and his jaw set in that particular way that meant the conversation was over as far as he was concerned. 20 minutes passed this way. Lisa tried different approaches. She tried being sympathetic. She tried being matter-of-fact. She tried appealing to his daughter's concern. Nothing worked. The wall he had built around himself was solid, and he had no intention of letting some civilian nurse breach it. She could see the warrior in him even now. Defensive, vigilant, unwilling to show weakness. Other nurses might have given up at this point. They might have marked him as non-compliant and moved on to patients who actually wanted help. But Lisa had not come this far to give up that easily. She had dragged wounded Marines through sniper fire. She had worked under mortar bombardment. She could handle one stubborn colonel. She made a decision then that went against every professional protocol she knew. Sometimes the only way to reach a Marine was to prove you were one of them. Lisa took a slow breath and let the professional mask drop for just a moment. She had tried everything by the book and nothing was working. Colonel Stone stood in his doorway like an immovable object, and she was running out of options. But she had one card left to play, and it was risky because it meant revealing something personal. Something she did not usually share with patients. She looked him directly in the eyes, and her voice changed. It was no longer the careful professional tone of a home health nurse. It was something else. Something that carried the weight of shared experience. She told him that with all due respect, she had not come here as just another civilian nurse. Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, but she caught it. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to figure out what she meant. She had his attention now, even if just for a moment. She could not waste it. Without breaking eye contact, Lisa reached down and slowly rolled up her right sleeve. The tattoo was now fully visible in the morning light. The eagle globe and anchor. The caduceus. The words 1/7th Marines Fallujah 2004. She held her arm out slightly so he could see it clearly. She did not say anything at first. She let the tattoo speak for itself. The change in Colonel Stone was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from his face. His arms dropped to his sides. His entire defensive posture crumbled in an instant. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. He stared at the tattoo like it was a ghost from his past made suddenly real. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. He asked if she had been with 1st Battalion. There was something in his tone that had not been there before. Not the command voice. Not the dismissive politeness. This was something raw and unguarded. Lisa nodded and told him she had been a Navy corpsman with November Company. She had been there in Fallujah when he led the assault on the Jolan district. She had patched up his Marines when they came back from the industrial sector. She had been in the aid station working around the clock during those brutal weeks of urban combat. Then she mentioned something specific. Something she knew would reach him. She told him she remembered the day he carried Corporal Davidson out on his back after the IED took his legs. She remembered because he had refused to let anyone else touch Davidson until he got him to her position. She remembered the look on his face. She remembered the blood. Colonel Stone's hand shot out and gripped the doorframe. His knuckles went white from the pressure. For a long moment he just stood there, processing what she had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. He said Davidson made it home. That he had married his high school sweetheart. That he had 2 kids now. Lisa allowed herself a small smile. She told him she knew. Davidson sent her a Christmas card every year. He was doing well. He was alive because of what Colonel Stone had done that day. because the colonel had refused to leave him behind. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had been in the same hell and survived it. They both knew what Fallujah had been like. The constant danger, the heat, the smell of smoke and blood, the weight of responsibility for lives that could end in an instant. No words were really necessary. Lisa lowered her sleeve, but kept her eyes on him. She spoke softly, but her words carried weight. She told him that he had spent his entire career making sure his Marines got the care they needed. He had never left anyone behind. So why was he leaving himself behind now? The question hung in the air between them. It was not an accusation. It was not judgment. It was simply the truth spoken plainly by someone who had earned the right to speak it. She watched as the words hit him. Watched as his shoulders sagged under a weight he had been carrying alone for too long. He was quiet for what felt like forever. His jaw worked as if he was trying to form words, but they kept getting stuck. His eyes were bright, and she realized he was fighting back tears. Finally, in a voice so low she had to strain to hear it, he admitted something. He said he did not know how to be the one who needed help. He had always been the one giving orders, making sure everyone else was okay. Lisa understood that completely. She had seen it in so many veterans. The strong ones who had taken care of everyone else suddenly found themselves lost when they were the ones who needed taking care of. It went against everything they had been trained to be. Leaders, protectors, the ones who solved problems instead of having problems. She took a small step closer, not threatening, not pushing, just closing the distance slightly. She told him that she understood, that she really did. Then she said something that made his head come up. She told him that she was giving him an order. Stand down and let his corpsmen do her job. That was what corpsmen were for. Still taking care of Marines, just like they did in Fallujah Stad. It was the right thing to say. The perfect thing. Framing it as an order gave him permission to accept help without feeling like he was giving up. It reminded him of the bond between Marines and their corpsmen. It connected this moment to something bigger than just his pride or his pain. Colonel Stone looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. Not as a stranger. Not as a civilian nurse. But as someone who had been there. Someone who understood. Someone who had earned the right to push past his defenses. Then slowly he stepped back from the doorway. An invitation. An acceptance. A surrender that was somehow also a victory. Lisa stepped inside and the door closed behind her. The apartment was exactly what she expected. Neat and orderly. Everything in its place. Military precision in every detail. But as her trained eyes swept the room, she saw the signs that others might miss. The medications lined up on the kitchen counter, but clearly not being taken properly. The refrigerator that probably held very little food. The curtains drawn against the sunlight. The smell of a space that was clean but not really lived in. Colonel Stone stood awkwardly in his own living room. He seemed uncertain now that he had let her in. Like he had opened a door, he did not know how to close again. His hands hung at his sides. His shoulders were slumped. He looked smaller somehow than he had moments before when he was defending his territory. Lisa set her medical bag down on the kitchen counter. She did not rush. She let him adjust to her presence. She knew this was hard for him. Admitting he needed help. Allowing someone into his space. Letting down his guard. These were not things that came naturally to a man like him. She started with simple questions. When was the last time he had eaten a real meal? When was the last time he had slept through the night? Which medications was he taking, and which ones had he stopped? Her tone was professional but warm. Not judgmental. Not condescending. Just gathering information. His answers were what she expected. He could not remember the last proper meal. Sleep was maybe 3 hours on a good night. He had stopped taking most of the medications because they made him feel foggy, and he hated that feeling. Everything he said painted a picture of a man who was struggling, but too stubborn to admit it until now. Lisa nodded and made notes. She explained what she was going to do. Basic vital signs first. Then they would go through his medications together and figure out a management plan that worked for him. She would coordinate with his doctors, set up a schedule, make sure he had proper nutrition. Olive said, matter-of-factly, like these were just tasks to complete rather than admissions of weakness. As she worked, she talked. Not about anything heavy, just small things. Mutual acquaintances from the battalion. Changes at Camp Pendleton over the years. The challenges of transitioning from military to civilian healthcare. She kept her tone light and conversational, giving him space to relax, to remember that accepting help did not mean losing himself. Over the following days and weeks, something remarkable happened. Colonel Stone began to let Lisa into not just his apartment, but into the carefully guarded spaces of his life. It did not happen all at once. Trust like that had to be earned, even when there is already a foundation of shared experience. But slowly and steadily, the walls came down. Lisa came by 3 times a week at first. She would check his vitals and make sure he was taking his medications properly. She would bring groceries and help him plan meals that he would actually eat. She coordinated with his doctors at the VA and made sure all his appointments were scheduled and that he actually went to them. The practical tasks were important, but they were not really what made the difference. What made the difference was that Lisa understood. When loud noises from construction next door made Colonel Stone freeze up and his hands start shaking, she did not ask what was wrong. She knew what was wrong. She simply moved them to a quieter room and kept talking like nothing had happened. When he got quiet and distant during their sessions, she recognized the signs of someone whose mind had gone back to Iraq. She would gently bring him back to the present without making a big deal of it. There were hard days. Days when he did not want to see anyone, including her. Days when the nightmares had been so bad that he had not slept at all and was too exhausted to pretend everything was fine. On those days, Lisa did not push. She would come in and do what needed to be done efficiently and then leave him to rest. She never made him feel guilty about the bad days. She just accepted them as part of the process. One afternoon about a month in, Colonel Stone finally opened up about what was really bothering him. They were sitting at his kitchen table organizing his medications for the week. Out of nowhere, he asked her if she ever felt like the person who came home from Iraq was not the same person who had left. Like something essential had been left behind in the sand and smoke. Lisa stopped what she was doing and looked at him. She told him yes. Every single day. She told him about how she sometimes felt like she was playing the role of a normal person, but inside, she was still that scared 22-year-old corpsman trying to save lives under fire. How certain smells or sounds could transport her back instantly. How she had learned to function but never quite learned to forget. He nodded slowly. It was clear he had thought he was the only one who felt this way. He talked about the 3 Marines from the IED blast. How he saw their faces every night. How he had replayed that day 1,000 times, wondering if there was something different he could have done. Some decision that would have changed the outcome. Lisa listened without interrupting. Sometimes people just needed to say things out loud to someone who would understand. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she told him about a Marine named Rodriguez who had died in her arms in Fallujah. She had done everything right, everything by the book. But he had still died, and she had carried that weight for years. She told Colonel Stone that eventually she had to accept that war takes people, and sometimes there is nothing you can do except honor their memory by living well. By not letting their deaths also claim you. It was not easy advice to hear, and it certainly was not easy advice to follow. But something about hearing it from someone who had been there made it feel possible. If Lisa could carry her ghosts and still function, then maybe he could too. Maybe survival did not mean forgetting. Maybe it just meant learning to live alongside the memories instead of being crushed by them. Lisa also pushed him in ways that other people could not or would not. She insisted he start attending a veteran support group that met weekly at the VA. He resisted at first with all his usual arguments. He did not need to sit around and talk about feelings. He was not going to cry on the shoulder of strangers. Lisa listened to all his objections and then told him he was going anyway. Orders from his corpsman. The first few group sessions were uncomfortable for him. Colonel Stone was used to being in command, not being vulnerable in front of others. But gradually, he began to see that everyone in that room was carrying similar burdens. The young corporal who had panic attacks in crowded spaces. The sergeant who could not hold down a job because his anger was out of control. The captain who had isolated herself completely from friends and family. They were all warriors and they were all struggling. He started participating more, sharing bits of his own story, listening to theirs. There was something powerful about being in a room full of people who did not need anything explained, who knew exactly what he meant when he talked about the weight of command or the guilt of survival. These were his tribe in a way that civilians could never quite be. Catherine noticed the changes in her father. He answered the phone when she called now. He agreed to have dinner with her without the usual arguments about not needing to be checked on. He looked better. Not perfect, but better. He had gained back some of the weight he had lost. His eyes were clearer. The apartment felt lived in again, instead of like a temporary shelter from the world. She tried to thank Lisa one day when they crossed paths at the apartment. Lisa brushed it off, saying she was just doing her job. But Catherine insisted. She told Lisa that she had watched her father slowly disappearing and had felt completely helpless. That Lisa had given her back her dad. That whatever she was doing was working in a way that nothing else had. Lisa smiled, but there was sadness in it too. She told Catherine that all she had really done was speak her father's language. That sometimes the strongest people need help from someone who has been where they are. Someone who understands that accepting help is not weakness, but wisdom. Someone who will not let them give up on themselves. The breakthrough moment came about 3 months into their work together. Lisa arrived for her regular visit to find Colonel Stone dressed in something other than old Marine Corps' workout gear. He was wearing actual civilian clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt. He told her somewhat sheepishly that he had signed up to volunteer at the VA hospital. They had a program where retired officers mentored younger veterans who were struggling with the transition to civilian life. Lisa felt a surge of pride and something else. Oh, maybe. Here was a man who 3 months ago would not even open his door, and now he was ready to help others. That was what healing looked like. Not perfect. Not without setbacks. But moving forward. Finding purpose again. Reconnecting with the values that had defined him for most of his life. She asked him what had changed. What had made him decide to volunteer? He was quiet for a moment before answering. He said that she had reminded him that Marines take care of each other. That service did not end just because you took off the uniform. That may be the best way to honor the men he had lost was to help the ones who were still here, still fighting their own battles. Lisa felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. She told him she was proud of him, that his Marines would be proud of him too, that this was what leadership really looked like. Not just in combat, but in showing others that it was. Okay to struggle, and okay to ask for help, and okay to keep fighting even when the war was over. Colonel Stone looked at the tattoo on her arm that was visible below her short sleeve. He said he owed her his life, that he had been drowning and had not even realized it until she threw him a line. Lisa shook her head. She told him he did not owe her anything, that corpsmen and Marines were bonded for life, that she was just doing what he had taught her battalion to do back in Fallujah. Never leave anyone behind, not on the battlefield and not at home. 6 months after that first meeting at his doorway, Colonel Stone stood in front of a room full of veterans at the local VFW hall. It was the annual Marine Corps' birthday celebration, and the room was packed with men and women who had served. Some were young with fresh faces and the look of people still figuring out what comes next. Others were older with gray hair and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. All of them were family in the way that only veterans could be. Lisa stood near the back of the room wearing a simple dress that showed her Fallujah tattoo clearly. She had been invited as an honored guest. Several of the older veterans had made a point of shaking her hand and thanking her for her service. There was a deep respect in this room for corpsmen who had served with Marines. Doc was more than just a nickname. It was a title that carried weight. Colonel Stone had been asked to say a few words. He stood at the front of the room looking more like his old self than he had in years. He had gained back the weight and then some. His shoulders were squared. His voice when he spoke carried that command presence that had once led men through hell. But there was something else there now, too. A softness, maybe. A willingness to be vulnerable that he had never shown before. He started by talking about what Semper Fidelis meant. Always faithful. Everyone in the room knew the words, but he wanted to talk about what they really meant. Not just the bumper sticker version, but the deep truth of it. He talked about being faithful to the Corps and faithful to each other. About the bonds that formed in combat and lasted a lifetime. Then his voice got quieter and more personal. He told them that he had forgotten something important after he retired. He had forgotten that being faithful to the Corps meant being faithful to yourself too. That you could not take care of your Marines if you were not taking care of yourself. That accepting help when you needed it was not weakness, but wisdom. He told them about sitting alone in his apartment 6 months ago, slowly dying from pride and stubbornness. About refusing help from everyone because he thought needing help meant he had failed somehow. About building walls so high that even his own daughter could not reach him. He saw heads nodding around the room. Others who had been there. Others who understood. Then he turned slightly and gestured toward Lisa. He told them about the day a Navy corpsman showed up at his door and refused to let him fall. About how she had broken through his defenses with a simple tattoo and a shared history. About how she had reminded him that Marines never stop being Marines and corpsmen never stop being corpsmen. That the bonds forged in combat did not end when the shooting stopped. His voice got thick with emotion as he continued. He said that Lisa had saved his life just as surely as if she had pulled him off a battlefield. That she had done it with patience and understanding, and by speaking a language he could hear when he was deaf to everything else. That she had taught him the most important lesson of his military career. The strongest warriors are the ones brave enough to ask for help. There was a moment of silence when he finished. Then someone in the back started clapping. Then someone else. Then the entire room erupted in applause. It was not polite golf clap appreciation. It was genuine, heartfelt recognition from people who understood exactly what he was talking about. Many of them had been where he was or knew someone who had. This was their story too. Lisa felt tears streaming down her face and did not bother to hide them. Several people near her were crying too. This was the moment that made everything worthwhile. Not just helping Colonel Stone, but knowing that his story would help others. That his willingness to be vulnerable and honest might give someone else permission to ask for the help they needed. After the speeches ended and people started mingling, Colonel Stone made his way through the crowd to where Lisa stood. They looked at each other with the kind of understanding that comes from shared experience. No words were really necessary, but he said them anyway. He thanked her again, told her she had given him his life back. Lisa shook her head and smiled. She told him he had done the hard work himself. All she did was show him the door. He was the one who had walked through it. He was the one who had chosen to fight instead of giving up. He was the one who was now helping others. She was just honored to have been part of his journey. A young Marine approached them hesitantly. He could not have been more than 25, with the look of someone recently separated from service. He told Colonel Stone that his speech had really hit home, that he had been struggling since getting out, that he had not wanted to admit he needed help because he thought it made him weak. But hearing a colonel talk about his own struggles made it seem okay. Somehow Colonel Stone put a hand on the young Marine's shoulder. He told him that struggling was not weakness, that every person in this room had struggled at some point, that asking for help was the bravest thing a warrior could do. He gave the young man his phone number and told him to call any time, day or night. That was what Marines did for each other. Lisa watched this interaction and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was exactly what she had hoped would happen. Colonel Stone was not just surviving now. He was thriving. He was using his experience to help others. He had found purpose and meaning again. The warrior spirit that had made him a great commander was now channeled into a different kind of battle. The battle to help veterans come home not just physically but mentally and emotionally. Over the next hour, Lisa talked with dozens of veterans. Some wanted to share their own stories. Others wanted advice about struggling family members. A few corpsmen thanked her for representing them well. It was exhausting, but in the best possible way. This was her tribe. These were her people. And being here with them reminded her why she had chosen this work. As the evening wound down, Catherine found Lisa near the door. She hugged her tightly and thanked her again for everything she had done for her father. She said she had her dad back. Not the broken man who had been wasting away in that apartment, but the strong, caring father she remembered from her childhood. Lisa hugged her back and told her that her father's strength had always been there. He had just needed to remember how to access it. The last person to leave the VFW hall was Colonel Stone. He and Lisa walked out together into the cool evening air. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, just enjoying the quiet after all the noise and emotion inside. A comfortable silence between two people who did not need to fill every moment with words. Finally, Colonel Stone spoke. He said that Lisa had taught him that some tattoos are just ink, but others are promises. Promises etched in flesh and bone. Promises that transcend time and distance. His voice was steady but emotional as he continued. He said her tattoo had been a promise that she would never stop being a corpsman, never stop taking care of Marines, never stop fighting for those who needed her. Lisa looked down at her arm where the tattoo was visible in the streetlight. The eagle globe and anchor. The caduceus. The words 1/7th Marines Fallujah, 2004. She had gotten it as a reminder of who she had been and what she had done. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a bridge between past and present. A way to reach people who needed to be reached. A symbol of bonds that could never be broken. She told Colonel Stone that he was right. It was a promise she had made to every Marine she had ever served with. A promise to never leave anyone behind. Not on the battlefield, and not in the quiet struggles of life after war. She told him that seeing him healthy and helping others was the greatest reward she could ever receive. That this was why she did what she did. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. But both of them knew this was not really goodbye. They were bonded now in a way that went beyond nurse and patient. They were part of each other's journey, part of each other's healing, and they would carry that connection for the rest of their lives. Colonel Stone drove home that night, feeling something he had not felt in years. Hope, purpose, connection. He was still a Marine. He would always be a Marine. But now he understood that being a Marine meant more than just the years in uniform. It meant living the values every single day, taking care of each other, never giving up. Always faithful. Lisa drove home thinking about all the veterans who were still out there struggling, still building walls, still refusing help. She could not save them all, but she could save some. One at a time. One tattoo reveal at a time. One honest conversation at a time. And maybe some of the people she helped would go on to help others. Maybe healing could spread like that. One warrior helping another. An unbroken chain of service and sacrifice and care. The Marine Corps' motto was Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Both Colonel Stone and Lisa Chun had learned the deepest truth of those words. Being faithful meant being there for each other in war and in peace, in strength and in weakness, in victory and in struggle. It meant understanding that true warriors are not the ones who never fall, but the ones who get back up. And sometimes getting back up meant letting someone help you stand.